friends, Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa String Works workshop. Let's all get a buzz. Not that kind of buzz. I mean, let's go get a buzz. I mean, let's go get it and get rid of it. That's the question that comes up all the time for me is, you know, I've got this buzz and I don't know where it's coming from, or I don't know how to fix this buzz that I'm hearing on my instrument. I get lots of emails on that. I get lots of questions on that. I get lots of instruments in the shop on buzzes. So I figure since that's one of the more common problems with instruments, let's just talk about buzzes, because I think you're going to hear some things here that you hadn't thought about, or a different way of looking at it, you know. I mean, everybody's got an opinion and a perspective on it, you know. I've got mine, and I've developed a lot of my shortcuts and thoughts over the years, and I thought it might be helpful to somebody to hear this. Let me just first give the official caveat right at the front. You know, about everything I say will have an exception to it. So, you know, you don't have to tell me that I'm wrong, that that your guitar does something different, okay? I mean, I understand there's always going to be some exception somewhere. I would say that most of the stuff I tell you, you can pretty much take it to the bank and it's going to be the way it is. However, there will always be exceptions, as we know. So if we get right into it, you know, there's a number of things that cause buzzes, obviously, and I would say, you know, if we're working on the 80-20 rule, then 80% of your time on your buzzes is going to be spent looking at your strings and your frets. The first black and white rule of thumb, and I've been even criticized for this in my videos, which I can't hardly believe, is that you need to make all your frets level, period. Now, you know, a lot of people do it a lot of different ways, and trust me, I am not knocking any method that you want to use. I don't care how you do it, as long as you get them level. If you want to use a straight edge for your level, that's fine with me. If you want to do it like I do it and just level the frets with a file and don't worry about the straight edge thing, that's how I do it. I've been doing it that way for a long time, and I get no complaints, so it must work. Let's talk about leveling frets, first of all. They have to be, people think I'm exaggerating when I say they need to be literally within a thousandth or two of each other. Now, a thousandth isn't very much. If you put your fingers together and try to leave a gap, more than likely you're leaving a gap of more than a thousandth of an inch. I mean, it's tiny. So a thousandth of an inch is almost nothing. A human hair is, I've never measured one, but people say they're around 4 thousandths of an inch. Okay, so divide that in 4 and you got 1,000. So I mean, we're talking a very, very small fraction of measurement. So how do you get your frets that level? Well, I don't care how level you get them, you'll probably never get them perfect. The more sensitive the device you use to check them with, the more discrepancy you'll find. So, you know, I feel like if you get them within a thousandth or two, you're doing real good. Now, how do you do that? Okay, well, let me show you my method. I know you've seen this tool in my videos. I made it, I think I saw Randy Schardiger with this from StuMac. I think it was a StuMac tool. Rather than buy one, I mean, I've always used a bastard file. What is a bastard file? It's I don't know if the camera will focus up this close or not on those tiny little file marks. But it's a tiny file. It's all cut one way. There's not a double cut or anything. So all the file is cut one way. It's actually called a mill bastard file. I believe this is a 6-inch one. Let's just quit guessing and check it. I'm pretty sure it's a 6-inch one. Yes, it's a 6-inch mill bastard file. Anyway, the thing about a file is, and I've also been criticized for this, they say I don't know what I'm talking about. There's no such thing as a flat file. Now, I know they look like they're flat. When you take them out of the package, you would think, yeah, they're flat, and they come from a factory, they'd be flat, right? Well, not true. I learned this back in, high school shop classes, that files never are completely perfectly flat. When you look down them, there will always be a very, very, very slight crown, okay? It's very slight, but it's there. So what you want to do is you want to turn that crown down, if you will, so that the high part of the file in the middle is on the fret side. In other words, you're turning the convex side down, the concave side up. So the file is on there. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but the file is on there like this on your fretboard. If you turn it over, you'll never get your frets level. Trust me. Now, that isn't very much, and you think, well, that will screw them up. It doesn't. You know, it actually gives you just the hair of clearance you need so that it slides above on your frets. Otherwise, it would be banging into your frets on the ends, you know. Especially if you turn it over and you're trying to file and you're banging into your frets, you got your file upside down. So that's very important first. You turn your file the right way. Well, since I only use that side of that file, I never use the other side for frets, I just decided to go ahead and glue it to this handle. That was the smartest thing I ever did. I should have done that 30 years ago. I've always just held onto it by hand, and I've got very strong hands. You don't believe me? Just ask anybody that's tried to unscrew something I've tightened up. People joke about it all the time in the shop here. But anyway, that's going away as I get older. I got a lot of arthritis in my knuckles and hands now. So this just was worth its weight in gold, putting a little handle on there. Now I can hold it real easy. I can still have my feel. I felt like holding it in my fingers was gave me a great feel for, because I can feel it the instant it goes level, the file starts to glide better. When you got a high spot, it wants to ride on that high spot, and that high spot, you can feel it dragging all the time. And when you just work it back and forth like this, you know, going over that fretboard, you can feel that high spot just go away, and now you're gliding. You're just gliding. Now, it takes a long time to get that feel. It's kind of, I would suppose it's kind of like a blind person that, you know, develops that sense of feel over time, you know. Another analogy would be like, you know, there's artists that can draw a portrait and make it look exactly like a photograph. You know, my daughter-in-law is one of those. I can't do that. But I can do things like this. I can feel that, and I literally just know the instant it gets flat. It's not a problem for me. It might be a problem for you. You may have to use the straight edge method, and the problem with the straight edge method, in my opinion, you still got to have real good eyesight, because you're talking 1,000th of an inch. You know, you're looking under there, and it's not always easy. I mean, you get that straight edge just a little cockeyed this way or that way, and you're not really straight across those frets. And I mean, it's a good method. I'm not knocking the method. I'm just saying it's got its drawbacks too. Okay, every method has drawbacks. That's how I do it, and that's the first thing I do. You got to get them level. Then after you level them, of course, then you want to recrown them, and that takes a special file too. You do need a recrowning file. This just happens to be the big one here for the big frets that's on there. I also filed the edges down on this, or ground the edges down so that they wouldn't hit the fretboard, because on this big one, it had extra deep edges, and those edges would hit the fretboard a lot of times and scratch the fretboard. So anyway, so you got to do both of those things, and then after you do that, it's also a good idea to polish the frets, and you can do that a lot of different ways too. I know Randy does a really good job. He makes them like a mirror image, and that's nothing wrong with that. It just takes a lot of time if you're into high production like I am, and I don't give you that little extra benefit. So if that's what you're looking for, you better talk to Randy, because he does a real good job on that. But anyway, the point is the frets got to be level. Once you get them level, okay, let's look at this. We'll just make kind of a drawing here, and I'll try to, we're drawing it upside down for the camera, which is the way it has to be for this. Actually, I'm just going to draw it my way, and I'll turn it around for you, because I'll never get it upside down. I can barely draw it the right way. Let's say this is your nut. Let's say this is your saddle back here. Here's your string going across, and it doesn't matter that I don't have it touching. That's not the issue. Okay, the fretboard coming along here like so. You know, up here at this end, and I assume you can see this. I hope that it's showing up. Up at this end where the nut is, this is the nut end. You know, on that first fret, I have about 18 thousandths clearance between the bottom of the string and that first fret. That's what I typically use. You could get away with as low as probably 10 thousandths and be fine. You're taking a lot more risks on buzzing though. 18 thousandths, and when I say 18 thousandths, I really mean more like 15 or something, because I set it really tight. The pick is in there fairly snug, so it's a little less than 18 thousandths. The pick I use is 18 thousandths on the money. So the point is, you got clearance here, and that means, and then of course you've got clearance all the way back to the saddle back here. So there's a lot of clearance through here, and typically you're not going to buzz in a situation like that. Now, when you start the buzzing is when you note it. You bring your string down. Well, from this fret to the next fret, you know, if they're perfectly level, now that string angle is very, very, very acute. And now you don't have 18 thousandths between, when you're noting it here, or I should say you're really actually noting it here, when you're noting it between the nut and the first fret, that second fret now, that because the string is sitting on this first fret, the distance between here and here is very minute. Now, I've never actually measured it, but I would guess it being only about 5 thousandths. It's not going to be very much, I can tell you that for sure. So the point is, if this fret is high by a couple of thousandths, and the string is vibrating by a couple of thousandths, now you're going to be touching that fret. So that angle becomes very, very, very acute once you start noting the string. That's why those frets have to be absolutely perfectly level. You can't have them off much at all and expect it not to buzz, especially if you have your action pretty low. Okay, I hope that makes that point. I would ask you if you had any questions, but you can't answer me on the video anyway. By the way, I knew since I was going to be passing out words of wisdom, I wore the appropriate shirt. For what it's worth. So now you know who you're getting your information from. Okay, so that's the leveling on the frets and how important it is. You know, a lot of people though, when they say, you know, it's buzzing, I say, is it buzzing on an open string or is it buzzing when you note it? Well, I say it buzzes when you, on any time, you know, open or closed or anything. Well, then you got to start thinking about other issues. It probably isn't just a fret. It could be a fret involved, but it could be something else too, especially when it's buzzing when it's open. When you hit an open string and you hear a buzz, I mean, you still want to look and see, do you have clearance at your first fret? If you don't have clearance at your first fret, well then there you go. But assuming that you have your 18 thousandths at your first fret and your frets are level, see, we're going to take this in progression, okay? So we're moving on here. Now the frets are level, you've got your 18 thousandths clearance, but you're hearing a buzz when you hit an open string. The two most common suspects are your nut and your saddle. Why? Because they're making contact with the string. Those are the two most common places. When you really get used to listening to it, you can almost tell it's in the nut or it's in the saddle, because you can kind of hear where it's coming from. You know, you get used to listening to this stuff. I do it all the time. I can't tell you that I get it right every time, first time. I don't. But, you know, I get pretty good at getting right there fast. So I can usually tell, oh, it's in the nut up here, or it's in the saddle. Now, why would it buzz in the nut or the saddle? All right, let's look at the paper again. And again, I'm going to draw it my way and turn it your way. And I'm going to draw a large nut here. Okay, and then your string comes through the nut like this. Okay, and if we look at down, if we look down on this also, then it would look more like, here's your nut going across this way, your string's going across this way, and then you've got a groove that string's riding in. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, well in this case, what can happen is, when you file that groove in here, let's say you screw it up, and I'm just going to draw this crazy wrong. Let's say your groove is filed at that weird angle, so now the string is riding on this point of your nut. It should be riding back here. See, your string should, the last place your string should touch the nut is right there. It must be the last place it touches. If it touches in the middle, like let's say you got a hump in the nut, that sounds terrible. But let's say you have a hump right here in that nut. Well, then your string's riding high in the middle, and it's going to vibrate on the sides of the slot. So, you know, the bottom line is, the way you want that nut cut there is that you want it, you want that angle sloping up like this, and you want your string coming off your peg head and basically touching right there, the last place it touches. You don't want it riding on the front, you don't want it riding in the middle, you want it riding right on that edge, that cutting edge right there. Same way with your saddle back here. And let's call this the saddle. And you know, a lot of saddles have an arch in them, and so the string is riding high on that point. That's okay, that'll keep it from buzzing, but technically your fret length or your scale length is measured from the front edge of this nut to the front edge of this saddle. And so if you're cut in the middle, you're actually off by a few thousandths. So I like to cut the saddle back here. I like to cut my saddle the same way I cut my nut. I like to have it slight angle like this, so your string is coming from your bridge pin back here, your string's coming up at an angle and then coming across, and the last place it touches is the front edge of that saddle. The point is, it has to touch at that point and this point, or it's going to buzz. If it's riding, well, I shouldn't say that. On the saddle, it's much more difficult to hear the buzz. You won't hear near as many buzzes on the saddle as you will on your nut because the nut's so much wider. But you will get it to buzz here too if you're not careful, especially if you have a little wider saddle. So I hope that's clear. It's probably clear as mud. But the bottom line is your scale length is measured from the inside edge to the inside edge, and that's where you want your string to make contact, is on that inside edge. If it makes contact somewhere else, it's very likely it could buzz. That's why when we file the nut, we're always careful to tell you that you want to file it about the same angle as your peg head. So you want it to kind of come down like that, you know, and that way your string touches the nut at the very last place before it goes over the fretboard. Okay, we've talked about fret leveling, the string acute angle, and the nut and the saddle being the buzzes. Okay, now when you hit an open string and it's buzzing, but it's not the saddle or it's not the nut, then there's several other things that can cause a buzz. One of the most common would just be something silly like, you know, you've made an artwork out of your strings up there in your peg head. I see this a lot. People do some fancy art wire sculptures up there. I've seen them done all kinds of fancy ways, man. I mean, coiled up and, you know, looped together and literally look like a sculpture. Well, you're just asking for a rattle or a buzz. You know, it's going to vibrate. There's sympathetic vibrations going on in your instrument, and you're going to cause something to vibrate. So if you want to cut the risk of having those kinds of buzzes, cut your strings short. You know, get them good and tied on, but then cut the excess off flat with your post. That way you don't have any extra thing up there that can rattle or buzz. Okay, so let's assume you've done that. Now what else could it cause it to buzz just on an open string? Well, the truss rod can buzz. I had one in the shop just recently, and I think it was on a video. I don't remember. Too much water goes under the bridge, guys. I don't remember all this stuff. I don't even try to remember it. I just know what happened recently, and I put it in a video. And that is that the truss rod was actually buzzing. And what happens there is a couple of things. One is that it could just be extra loose, and the truss rod's in there flopping around. And it will buzz at a certain note that you play or a certain vibration of some sort that you're causing to the instrument. That will cause that truss rod to buzz. So obviously you want to make sure your truss rod's always snugged up. It doesn't have to be real tight, but it should be snug so that it can't vibrate. Let's see, the next thing that would cause it to buzz when it's open like that could be something attached to the guitar. Pickups, buttons, strap buttons, even if they're loose, they can rattle and buzz. So you got to check all of that kind of stuff out and get it off your list. Those are the kinds of things that cause those buzzes. Internal body of the guitar can buzz. It can, it's not very likely. If you have something loose in there, it can be vibrating around, especially like little glue chips and things can vibrate and make a noise. You know, the old timers used to put a rattlesnake rattle in there. You know, it's an old wives' tale that would cause better vibration in the instrument. And I've even heard those rattle, especially in old fiddles, you know. And a lot of them like that sound because it kind of blends that old, you know, scratchy fiddle sound out a little bit. But anyway, so anything inside the guitar loose can cause a rattle or a buzz, of course. Strap buttons are pretty common too. Oh yeah, there is another thing that is not real common, but I've seen it at least a half a dozen times, and that is the serving that's wrapped on your string can buzz if it's loose. So, you know, like if you're hitting it open like that and you're hearing a buzz, or it can be closed too, but I mean, generally speaking, you'll hear it more when it's open and you're hearing that rattle. What I do to test if it's the serving is I take a hold of the serving, like maybe in the middle of the string, and I slide towards the nut. And then I'll hit it again and see if I still hear it. And I'll take and, you know, slide towards the saddle and like literally slide my fingers along that serving and then hit it again. A lot of times it'll go away when you slide the serving one direction or the other. And if you're hearing it go away when you're messing with the serving, well, then you can tell your serving's causing the actual sound. So that's another thing that can cause it. I think that's about it. I can't really think of too many other things. If you all think of things, put them in the comments and let other people benefit from other reasons why an instrument can buzz. I thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Talk to you later.